Well, how's it going, guys? Wandering Beast here. Just got done working out and I'm trying to catch up on all the things I've promised you and I've promised other people to get caught up on. So we're gonna go back a little bit, a few months. Actually, not too many months because it was just snowing not too long ago. We've got a freeze warning in Central Oregon into the beginning of June. But if you go back a couple months, we were taking a trip to the coast. There was still snow in the mountains, and I wanted to see after a couple years how my diesel heater looked on the inside. Now, one of the things you guys know from the videos is I absolutely love that little Chinese diesel heater, and if you go back a couple years, I haven't touched that thing, and I've had phenomenal success with it every time I've used it. So I attribute our enjoyment and success on our November trip in the middle of winter to Eastern Oregon down at 6 degrees, hitting hot springs every other day, keeping our swimsuits and our towels and everything dry, keeping us comfortable to be able to put on dry swim trunks before we go into the next hot tub or hot springs the next couple days. So I really don't think we could have done that trip without that diesel heater. Now, I've done lots of different upgrades. We've covered some of them. I am going to do a separate video on just the fuel tank itself because I think that's the biggest upgrade that you should do to the tank, or the diesel heater. But what I want to talk about today is just overall maintenance. I haven't touched this thing, and diesel heaters, they are notorious for getting dirty. And I think one of the reasons I've had such great success is because I always just burn it at almost high all the time. And if I even turn it down to like 3.5 hertz, I'll kick it back up to 5 for a good 40 minutes, an hour before I shut it down so that it has a chance to cook all that stuff off. Now, over a couple years of lots of use, now we don't live in the bus time full time, but we use it all the time. I use it all the time. It heats that backspace up so quickly. Even in the winter when the truck's warming up, I'll fire that thing up just to heat all that air back there and not rely on just the truck heater to try to blow hot air back there. So with that said, let's tear this thing apart. Are there books? So I had one bolt that was in pretty bad shape. Looked like it was stripped in from the factory. Kind of dug in to the aluminum casing here. I don't know if you can see that. So ran in a M5 by 0.8 thread and just chased all the threads. All the gaskets were pretty good except for this one little spot here. Not sure if I can get it to focus. You can see there's a split in there. So just to make sure I've got a good seal of the combustion area, I'm using a little ultra copper gasket maker on there. And then I picked up some new hardware. Unfortunately, the old bolts seem to be around a 14 mil length. You can see if I put the old janky stripped out one next to this one, it's just a touch shorter. My hardware store only had 12s or I think 16s, and this is probably a 14 in the middle. But I've tested it out and they grab pretty good, and especially after chasing those threads with the tap and die, they go in a lot smoother, and I'm a little bit more confident in them going in straight and staying tight and maintaining a good seal in there. You know, glow plug's looking pretty good. Not a lot of damage or extra worn spots on there. All the wiring seems pretty good, so we're going to put that back in there. Intake fan and gasket all seem to be in really good shape here. Fan still pulls freely and shouldn't be two issues. Now looking way down inside there's a little intake screen, and it seems to be running the circumference of this hole. I always thought when I was told about the screen it was a cover, if you will. But as the fuel comes in here and atomizes, it hits that screen, and it's just kind of a mesh screen that sits in there. And it looked pretty clean. I chased everything out with brake fluid. That little hole that you see right there is a keyhole. You got to make sure that stays clear and it's not clogged up. But otherwise, everything on here is looking pretty good. Alright, I know there's lots of videos on YouTube here, but this is your glow plug hole, so it can't go on out. That's where that screen is that you're looking at that heats up that area where the fuel then comes in through the bottom and hits that screen and atomizes into this burn chamber. Now with the copper gasket, I've got to wait about an hour till I can actually cinch everything down. So I'm just going to lightly get the thread started and then come back in an hour, cinch that back down, and we'll keep plugging away at putting this back together. Everything else was pretty good. These are outside threads, so I'm not too worried about those. Those are also easy to replace. As well as when I did my very first video, I talked about how I really liked the Happy Best Buy, whatever the one I'll link it below. Whatever heater brand I chose off of Amazon, that was $200 at the time, but I chose the aluminum case, and I'm still glad that I did. I've seen people have issues with their cases. They're noisy, they flex, they don't go back together well, and so far, other than just being kind of cheap aluminum, it cleans up well. You could probably polish this if you want to, but just keep everything smooth, keeps the dust and the dirt from sticking, as well as the gasket on the bottom that makes a seal around the intake and exhaust. Guys, you've heard it before, but I use that 303, and it really sort of rehydrates the rubber. So no cracking or issues on this. And other than that, I've been very impressed so far about how everything's been holding up. Well, good morning guys, Wandering Beast here, and hot coffee is a necessity. It is freezing and snowing like crazy outside, so it was a good thing we got the diesel heater all buttoned up last night. I didn't fire it up yesterday because I wanted to give that copper gasket material at least overnight. It recommends 24 hours before you fire it up. It recommends even an hour before you crank everything down. So down the road I will probably get spare gaskets for that. I still would like to have a spare pump, but because I'm running 2 diesel heaters, that effectively gives me a backup if something goes wrong. The hydronic has already been kicked on to warm up the engine because I have errands to run out in the snowstorm. And yeah, so this will be the first fire up of the diesel air heater. I'm pretty confident it's going to work, but I want to make sure it's up and running. I don't have the exhaust secured, so I just went outside and made sure that it's not touching anything it can melt. And we're going to make sure that can get the cab up to temperature, and then eventually we will get the hydronic put into the cab for a second air heater. So that'll be its own separate video, guys. It's currently 28 degrees outside and 29 degrees in the bus. So all right, now you can see you tear it apart and it was filthy. Absolutely filthy. That's a couple years of neglect of running it as good as I think I can, not really having any issues. But I could tell this last trip that I did, it wasn't performing quite as well as it used to. So that's why I initially wanted to tear it apart. Now my biggest worry was, you spend $200 on a Chinese diesel heater, are you going to be able to pull this thing apart and put it back together? And as you saw, I had a small tear in the gasket, but got it back together with the copper gasket maker. I did have to chase a thread with a tap and put in some new bolts. I think that's probably better than it was when it came from the factory, but I spent $200 on this. I could have easily spent $1,500 on an S-Bosch or any of the other brands. And I have personally met and talked to lots of people that have used these, maybe set up incorrectly, but they've had issues with the $1,500 one just as easily as they do the $200 one. Now, when I first got this, it was just kind of being talked about. There was a few people trying it, few people failed, few people said do not try a diesel heater. And I don't know. I was so happy with the success and enjoyment of this little $200 diesel heater. I'll see if they're still selling it. I'll put a link down below. I got it off of Amazon. If you watched my initial videos, you know that I was missing some parts, and they got right back to me, and I was able to have a great conversation with them and get that solved. That I went ahead and I've been looking for a hydronic heater. I want a solution for heating the coolant on the bus, for making hot water, and creating a secondary heater in case something craps off. That also gives me a backup with a fuel pump. I can switch the fuel pumps between the two. They're identical. I don't think too many other things are gonna flip-flop, other than maybe some fuel line and things, and we'll talk about that in the tank video as far as upgrades. But I couldn't be more pleased. I would say every 2 years or even every year, it's summertime now, tear that thing apart, put it back together, fire it up, make sure it works, and let it go. And as long as you treat this thing well and you clean it on a regular maintained basis, this has been a couple years, I haven't touched this thing. and you make sure you run it at high as often as possible, I probably can count on one hand the amount of times that I have just turned it down and left it all night. It is not often. In fact, one of those nights I think I just fell asleep and forgot to turn it off. It doesn't have a timer on it because it's a cheap Chinese diesel heater. But I've been really happy with it. I think if you keep up with your maintenance, you're not afraid to tear this thing apart, fix a couple things. I'll probably try to get it some gasket kits, try to get glow plugs, and maybe just a couple little, maybe a backup fuel pump, and throw that in the storage as part of the toolbox backup, part list. And I can't imagine ever having an issue with it, but we will see. Time will tell, guys. Hope this helps. Put comments down below. Let me know what you guys think. If any of you guys have tried a diesel heater since my original video a couple years ago. And take care, guys. We'll see you down the road.
Thanks for all the love and support. You guys are amazing. Please like, share, and subscribe. Follow the adventure on social media, and we'll see you on the road.